The night the waiter lifted his hand to pour the champagne, the room hushed around my mother's smile. Gold light slid across the white tablecloths, catching the 60 on the cake, like a coin at the bottom of a fountain. I felt the stem of my glass slick under my palm, the chill of the restaurant air, the brush of Jason's sleeve at my elbow. Eleanor stood at the head of the table, posture perfect, voice warm and practiced. To family, she said, eyes drifting to Vanessa as if on a leash. Laughter, clinking glass, a dozen faces turned toward the favorite. No one looked at me. I watched the bubbles rise and break, and for the first time, I understood how a person can be present at her own life and still not be counted. Before I go on, let me know where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever been seated at a table where your name was printed, but your presence wasn't, hit that like button and share this with someone who knows the feeling. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. But to understand how that toast became the hinge of my life, you need to know where the door began to squeak. I grew up in a house where the clock over the stove clicked louder than conversation. After my parents divorced, everything sounded like that small, impatient ticks that hurried you along. Eleanor managed a boutique downtown and prided herself on display scarves looped just so lights pointed to hide the scuffed tiles. She treated our life the same way. If you could arrange it pretty, maybe you wouldn't have to fix it. She liked order, lines of shoes by the door and spoons nested in the drawer. She liked Vanessa more. It wasn't cruel at first, just the gentle tilt of the world to make everything slide toward the shiny child. Look how nicely Vanessa puts her toys away, she'd beam, while I stood with dishwater up to my wrists, 9 years old, and tall enough to see the cracks in the window caulk, when my science teacher told her I was one of the brightest she'd taught. My mother smiled thinly and said, "You should see her room." The teacher blinked. I learned not to. The house had an oak table with a groove worn by elbows, my elbows doing homework under a dim lamp. On winter nights, wind pushed at the siding, and the furnace kicked on like a cough. That table was where I became useful. I learned to chop onions without crying, learned how to stretch ground beef across 2 meals, learned that praise was rationed like sugar and always saved for dessert. If Vanessa came home with a C, Eleanor called it potential. If I brought home straight A's with 1 B, she found the B like a stain and scrubbed at it with words. I didn't resent Vanessa. That would have made it easy. She was soft and easily pleased with the kind of smile that made cashiers slip her extra napkins. She learned quickly that our mother preferred gentleness over truth. When I disagreed, Eleanor called it stubborn. When Vanessa pleaded, Eleanor called it sweet. There is a special kind of loneliness in realizing your mother mistakes your backbone for a flaw. On the other side of town, my father built things that stood straight and didn't feel. But he was gone mostly. 3 states away, a new life checks that came less and less, then not at all. Every month had a number attached to it, and every number had my name. Do you know how hard I worked to keep a roof over your head? Eleanor would say, pinching a receipt between 2 fingers like a bug. The answer was always yes. I knew it in the scuffs on my shoes and the way I measured shampoo by teaspoons. There was one place where I wasn't a tally mark. Grandma Martha lived in a square little house with a porch light that always came on early. She kept a pencil behind her ear and a stack of crosswords on the kitchen counter. When I walked in, she would slide a plate of butter cookies across the table and say, "Show me what your brain did today." She didn't mean the grade. She meant the leap, the place where my mind had felt like a bird. "You have a gift," she told me, tapping the side of her mug. Numbers tell the truth if you let them. We did math at that oak table too, hers scarred by coffee rings and warm with the sound of a kettle. With her, my life had edges that held. Back at home, I became what the house needed: extra hands, a driver, if Eleanor stayed late at the boutique. When Vanessa had piano practice, I timed the metronome and made a game of counting measures. I learned to iron a blouse so the collar lay like it was listening. Public criticism bloomed into a routine. If a relative came by, Eleanor would sigh and say, "Nora is so smart, if only she tried at home." Then she'd laugh in a way that told everyone it was safe to agree. They always did. The night I brought home a certificate for a state math competition, rain ticked against the kitchen window. Vanessa spun in a new skirt Eleanor had put on layaway, and I waited for the space between one breath and another where my mother might look at me differently. "Why don't you put that in your room?" she said, not turning. "We don't need papers on the fridge." I slid the certificate into my backpack and sat down to slice carrots. The knife made a steady sound, like rain. By high school, I worked my way out of the house on purpose debate team practices that ran late tutoring shifts in the library hours where my value was measured in questions I could solve. I came home to a mother who inspected me like a dress seam. "Stand up straight," she'd say, then tweak a strand of hair and ask why I couldn't be more like Vanessa, more easy, more soft around the edges. I learned the discipline of silence. It felt safe, if not kind. The night the acceptance letter came, the porch light buzzed with early spring moths. The envelope had the kind of paper that makes your fingers press harder. I stood in the entryway and read it twice, my heart counting backward from 10. Full scholarship. A university far enough away that seasons would feel different. In my mind, I saw 2 suitcases under a sky I had never lived beneath. At dinner, Eleanor passed the salad like a baton. I waited for a lull. I got in, I said the words steady and small. They covered everything tuition housing. The fork clinked. She didn't look at me. "You think you're too good for state?" she said, as if she'd been rehearsing. "Always thinking you're special." Vanessa watched me over the rim of her water glass and smiled a tiny, not unkind smile that said she was spared. "It's a full ride," I tried. "This is Eleanor's hand," cut the air. "Who will help here? Who will drive your sister? Or is your brilliance going to hire a chauffeur?" She put the fork down and pressed her napkin flat the way you press a ripple out of silk. "You'll fail," she said like a prayer. "New place, big city. You'll come home. They always do." That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the poster above the desk, the one of a lighthouse in a storm I'd bought on clearance at the pharmacy. The beam cut through painted rain. The house breathed. I could hear the TV in the next room and the way Vanessa laughed when the canned laughter told her to. I pulled an overnight bag from the closet and set it on the floor empty, like a promise I was afraid to make. Eleanor's favorite trick was public comparison. She wielded it like a ribbon pretty, but meant to bind. At a parent-teacher night that spring, my physics teacher told my mother I was precise, curious, able to see the pattern in a mess. "She must get that from you," the teacher said pleasantly. "From me," Eleanor replied, smiling for the room. "You should see the mess she leaves in the sink." The other parents chuckled. I watched the teacher's mouth pause, then move on. Later in the car, Eleanor drove with both hands tight at 10 and 2. "Don't make me look foolish," she said. We passed a church sign that read, "Grace on Sundays, courage the rest of the week." I read it like a math problem. Courage equals grace in motion. Money tightened and snapped. My father's checks dried to paper dust. Bills gathered on the counter like a bad habit. I took a weekend job shelving books at the library. On Sunday mornings, I walked there under a gray sky that smelled like old snow, my breath clouding as I passed the diner where men in work boots talked quietly over eggs. The librarian paid me in cash crisp bills that felt like choices. I hid them in a shoebox under my bed. Some weeks, Eleanor found the box and left the lid slightly off as if to say, "I see your secrets. Remember, mine are bigger." When Vanessa forgot her composition book, I drove it to the school and waved at the secretary, who called me dear like a permission slip. When the boutique needed someone to run the front during inventory, I stood at the register, and smiled at women who glanced at their reflections more than they looked at me. When an aunt asked at Thanksgiving what I wanted to be, I said accountant because it sounded useful. What I meant was, I want to add up all the ways a person is worthy and not watch the minus sign grow. People think injustice shouts. Often it whispers in rooms you dust yourself. Eleanor's words left small bruises in places covered by clothing. Too serious, she'd murmur as she straightened a picture frame. Too much. When Vanessa's friends came by, my mother would usher them past my door with a sweet apology. She's studying. The apology wasn't for the inconvenience of quiet. It was for me. On the last day of senior year, I sat on the football field in a red robe that smelled like plastic wrap. The principal mispronounced my last name as he handed me the valedictorian medal. The breeze lifted my hair, and the tassels buzzed in my ear. In the crowd, Eleanor shaded her eyes and clapped politely. Later at home, she stood at the sink while I pinned the medal to the corkboard above my desk. "Small pond," she said, rinsing a glass. "Easy to be a big fish?" I slid the medal's pin through cork and felt it catch. I don't know why I expected it to pierce anything else. The night before I left for orientation, just a weekend at the university, to test the shape of the future, the house turned colder. No slammed doors, no scene. Just a wall of quiet you could lean your head against and hear your own blood. Eleanor set 2 plates for dinner and then ate standing up. She didn't ask for help with the dishes. She didn't say goodnight. When I stepped into the hallway, the porch light clicked on by itself, catching dust in the air like falling stars. In my room, the suitcase lay open half full. I tucked Grandma Martha's note under my folded jeans, where it would feel like a hand on my back. If injustice is a balance, that was the moment I saw the weight of it. Not in a single act, but in the shape of a life, one person given the soft place to land, the other handed the mop and told to be grateful for the work. At the restaurant years later, when Eleanor lifted her glass and toasted to family, I knew what she meant. To the family we arrange, not the one we build. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and broiled fish. The cake glittered. People leaned toward the center of the table where the light was. I sat at the edge, a practiced silhouette. The injustice wasn't loud. It was the seat I never had, and the story I was expected to narrate, dutiful, invisible, generous, when asked. I set my glass down and watched the bubbles settle. Somewhere in me, something quiet shifted like a lighthouse beam turning. Not a roar, a decision. By the time I finished that sip, I knew there would be a cost to calling things by their right names. I just didn't know yet how much it would ask of me or how alone the first step would feel. I left for college 2 weeks after that dinner. My suitcase looked small in the doorway, but it was all I owned that was truly mine. Grandma Martha drove me to the airport in her old sedan, humming under her breath, her hands steady on the wheel. The air smelled faintly of her lavender lotion. Neither of us spoke much. When she parked at the terminal, she turned to me, her eyes soft behind her glasses. "You're doing the right thing, Nora," she said. "Build your life on your own terms." I nodded, afraid that if I spoke, I'd start to cry. She hugged me once tight, like she meant to leave an imprint, and then I was gone. Those first months were hard in a way that no one warns you about. The dorm room was small, painted a tired white, with a window that looked out over a parking lot. I shared it with a girl named Lauren, who loved music and believed in good luck charms. She hung fairy lights over her bed and said they kept her calm. I didn't believe it, but sometimes, when the nights got long, I'd leave them on after she fell asleep. The light made the room feel like someone cared. The scholarship covered tuition and a basic meal plan, but everything else was on me. I worked mornings at the campus cafe serving coffee to half-awake students who never looked up from their phones. In the afternoons, I tutored freshmen in algebra. On weekends, I shelved books in the library. Between jobs and classes, I studied wherever I could find quiet, under stairwells, in corners of the student center at empty bus stops. There were nights when I went to bed too tired to eat, and mornings when I woke to the sound of the first bus already late. Still, for the first time, I was living a life that was mine. I wasn't being measured by anyone else's yardstick. My professors noticed my focus. My work had precision. I could lose myself in the rhythm of solving equations, and for a few hours, nothing hurt. Each test, each paper, each small success was like adding a brick to a house I was building out of sheer will. My mother's voice still echoed through me, though. She called every few weeks, mostly to ask about money or to remind me what she didn't believe I could do. "Don't burn out," she'd say, meaning, "You're going to fail." When I told her about my first A on a midterm, she said, "Well, it's early in the semester. Don't get ahead of yourself." She'd end the call by asking about Vanessa, how she was doing in high school, how she'd started helping at the boutique, and her tone would soften in a way it never did for me. I learned to keep those calls short. The spring of my junior year, Grandma Martha got sick. The doctors said pancreatic cancer stage 4. I called home as soon as I found out, but Eleanor sounded distracted. "She's old Nora," she said. "These things happen." I asked if she could help me fly home just a few $100s for a ticket. "You should have planned better," she said flatly. "You chose to live far away." I worked double shifts at the cafe, sold my textbooks, even started a fundraiser among my classmates, but the money didn't come fast enough. Grandma passed away on a Tuesday afternoon while I was wiping tables. I didn't get to say goodbye. That night, I walked to the river behind campus. The sky was cold and dark, the air sharp with spring wind. I sat on a bench and read her old letters, the ones she'd sent me during freshman year, filled with small advice and hope. One of them said, "Remember, child courage is quieter than fear. It shows itself in persistence." I folded it back carefully and tucked it in my coat pocket. The next day, I went back to work. Grief doesn't stop the clock. After the funeral, Eleanor called. "Your grandmother left you some things," she said, as if she were talking about a forgotten coat. "When will you come get them? They're taking up space in my garage." There was no warmth, no condolence, just logistics. I couldn't bring myself to answer her. Instead, I rented a small storage unit and had everything sent there: boxes of books, photo albums, a set of old ledgers from Grandma's bookkeeping days. Inside one of those boxes, taped to a manila envelope, was a letter with my name written in her steady script. It began, "By the time you read this, I'll be gone, but I want you to remember something. Your mother's love is broken, not absent. Don't mistake her fear for truth. Build your life with courage." There was a small savings bond tucked inside enough to cover my final semester. I cried so hard, that night I could hardly breathe, but the tears were different. They weren't helpless anymore. They were something like release. By senior year, I'd stopped waiting for Eleanor's approval. I stopped defending myself against Vanessa's remarks. I focused on what I could build. When graduation came, the sun was bright over the city, the air thick with June heat. I crossed the stage, shook hands, and took my diploma. No one from my family was in the crowd, but I didn't look for them. I knew they wouldn't be there. My first job offer came from a financial firm in New York. It felt like the start of something solid, a place to stand. Eleanor's reaction was predictable. "New York is dangerous," she said. "You'll end up in debt. You think you're too good for small-town life." I told her calmly that my address would change in 3 weeks, and that I'd send it if she needed it. She hung up without saying goodbye. The city swallowed me at first. My apartment was no bigger than my college dorm, with a radiator that hissed and a window that looked out on a brick wall. I ate instant noodles and learned to walk fast. The trains were loud, the air smelled of rain and metal, and every street corner felt like a test. I worked 12-hour days, sometimes 14, learning to read balance sheets by instinct, learning to hear the story in numbers. My manager noticed. "You don't miss much," he said once, and it was the closest thing to praise I'd heard in years. After a year, I moved to a safer neighborhood. I could finally afford a couch that wasn't secondhand and a coffee maker that didn't leak. I framed one of Grandma's old photographs, a picture of her garden in full bloom, and hung it by the window. I thought about sending a copy to Eleanor, but I didn't. The silence felt better than the disappointment. It was around that time she called again. Her tone was light, almost polite. "Nora, I hope you're well," she began, which immediately made me wary. She explained that she'd lost her job at the boutique, that she'd fallen behind on rent, that eviction papers were coming. "I just need a little help," she said. The number she gave me was $2,000. I wired it that afternoon. I told myself it was the right thing to do. 2 months later, she needed another small favor, this time for utilities, then for medical bills, then for a car repair. Each request came with the same tone, casual, expectant, never grateful. "You're doing so well, honey," she'd say. "It's nice to know you can help." Vanessa was living with her by then, working part-time, still chasing the next idea that would really take off. I told myself they just needed time. Years passed in that rhythm. My paychecks grew, and so did the amounts Eleanor asked for. I started keeping a spreadsheet: rent, repairs, medical emergencies, even birthday gifts. It was meant to help me budget, but it became a record of something else. Quiet exploitation that looked like love. I met Sarah during that time, a colleague who shared her lunch breaks with me in Bryant Park. She had a sharp eye and a soft voice, the kind that could say hard things kindly. One afternoon, she noticed me frowning at a message on my phone. "Everything okay?" she asked. I told her, half embarrassed, about the latest emergency. She listened, then asked a question that stopped me cold. "Has anything changed since you started helping them?" I opened my mouth, but couldn't answer. Maybe, she said gently, "You're fixing something that doesn't want to be fixed." That conversation echoed in my mind for days. Eventually, I found a therapist, Dr. Lillian West. She specialized in family dynamics. She taught me words like enmeshment and emotional boundaries. She said something that felt like a stone dropped into a well. You can't rescue someone who's comfortable being carried. For the first time, I began to see my mother's dependence as a pattern, not a plea. I changed things slowly. I set a fixed amount each month for rent paid directly to the landlord. I stopped sending extra money for vague emergencies. I asked for receipts. Eleanor's reaction was swift and sharp. "So, now I'm your employee," she snapped. "After everything I did for you, this is the thanks I get." The guilt pressed hard, but I held the line. "This isn't about punishment," I said quietly. "It's about fairness." She hung up, and for weeks I heard nothing. Then one afternoon, Vanessa called instead. "You really hurt Mom," she said. Her voice was smooth, practiced. "She says you're making her beg." I closed my eyes and let the silence stretch. "Maybe Mom needs to learn to ask, not demand," I said. Vanessa sighed, the sound of someone rehearsing disappointment. "You've changed," she said. "Success made you selfish." I looked out the window at the skyline, the city she hated, the life I'd built from nothing, and thought maybe that's true, but at least it's mine. That night, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea and read Grandma's letter again. The paper had gone soft at the folds. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were still clear. "Build your life with courage." I traced the letters with my thumb. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to scare me. Now it felt earned. I didn't know it yet, but that was the season when the distance between me and my family stopped being about miles. It became something else, a space shaped by truth. The kind that can't be crossed by guilt or money. And in that stillness, somewhere between relief and ache, I began to understand what it meant to be truly alone, not abandoned, but separate. It was the first step toward peace, though it didn't feel like it then. Spring arrived quietly that year, the kind of season that slips in through an open window and surprises you with the scent of rain. I was turning 29 and beginning to feel like I had finally caught up to my own life. The long hours at the firm were paying off, and for the first time I could breathe without counting dollars or apologizing for it. The loneliness that used to sit beside me at night was still there sometimes, but softer something I could live with. That was when I met Jason. It happened at a charity fundraiser. My company sponsored one of those events with too much crystal and too many polite smiles. I was standing near the buffet pretending to read a brochure when a man next to me said, "You look like someone doing mental math." I turned and found a tall man with kind eyes, the sort that listen before the mouth moves. His suit was neat, but not loud, his tie slightly crooked. "Just wondering how many zeros they'll expect on the donation check," I said. He laughed, the easy kind of laugh that fills the space between two strangers. "I'm Jason," he offered. "I write code, not checks." We ended up talking for hours that night, the noise of the room fading as we found a rhythm of our own. He was a software engineer for a healthcare startup, a man who built quiet things that helped other people's work matter more. When I left that evening, the rain had started again, tapping against my umbrella like applause. He walked me to a cab and said, "You don't meet someone like you at these things often." I thought about that line for days. Our first date stretched 5 hours past what either of us planned. Dinner turned into coffee, and coffee turned into a walk along the Hudson where the city lights trembled on the water. He didn't rush me, didn't fill the silence when I fell quiet. I realized how rare that was to be with someone who let silence belong to both of us. Months passed, and the edges of my guarded life began to soften. Jason never pried, but he noticed things. The way I tensed when my phone rang late at night, the way I flinched at the sound of certain words like obligation or help. One night, while we were making dinner, he asked about my family. I told him carefully at first about Eleanor and Vanessa, about the distance that wasn't just geography. He set the knife down and listened, elbows resting on the counter, his face calm. "That sounds exhausting," he said simply. "You know it's not normal, right?" His words startled me, not because they were harsh, but because they were so plain. For years, I'd been treated like my pain was exaggeration. Hearing someone name it for what it was felt like a window opening after a long winter. I cried quietly right there by the stove. Jason didn't move closer or pull away. He just stood beside me, hand resting on the counter, waiting until I caught my breath. Over time, he started to see more of it. The phone calls that left me shaken, the guilt that arrived in my inbox disguised as small talk. Eleanor's voice carried the same tone whether she asked for money or gave advice. Expectation dressed as affection. "Just until the insurance clears," she'd say. Or, "You know, your sister's business idea is really taking shape. She just needs some startup help." Each call ended with the same knot in my stomach. Jason never told me what to do, but his silence spoke enough. I began to realize that kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's surrender. When Eleanor finally insisted on meeting him, I agreed, though every instinct told me not to. We chose a small restaurant near Philadelphia during one of my business trips. She arrived in pearls and practiced charm, assessing Jason like a jeweler inspecting a stone. The first half hour was an interrogation: his job, his salary, his family. When he answered patiently, she pivoted, telling childhood stories meant to make me small again. Nora was always so serious, she said with a laugh. Even at 5, she preferred books over people. Vanessa now, she could light up a room. I watched Jason's face as she spoke. He didn't flinch or smile politely. He just looked at me steady and said nothing. On the train back, he took my hand and said, "You've carried that kind of weight for a long time." I didn't need to ask what he meant. Work kept me busy, but the patterns at home crept in again. Every few months, a new crisis appeared. This time, it was Vanessa's teeth dental work the insurance won't cover. Then the car broke down. Then the roof leaked. I checked my records one night and realized I'd sent over $90,000 since that first phone call years ago. Yet nothing had changed. Jason looked at the spreadsheet and whistled softly. "That's a small house," he said. "Or 5 years of your retirement." I tried to laugh it off, but the sound caught in my throat. She'd see it as betrayal if I stopped. He leaned back on the couch, thoughtful. "What about betrayal of yourself?" That question stayed with me. It followed me through meetings, through quiet subway rides, through the nights when I woke at 3 a.m., replaying old arguments. I started to see how every dollar I sent home came with invisible strings, pulling me back into the same old role. Then came the request that finally showed me the truth. Eleanor called one afternoon, voice honey sweet. "Vanessa's finally found her calling," she said. "She wants to open her own boutique just like the one I ran. It'll be such a lovely legacy." "That's nice," I said cautiously. "She just needs a little help getting started. 50,000 should do it." The air left my lungs. I asked for a business plan, something to show she was serious. The pause on the line stretched too long. "You don't trust your own sister," Eleanor said, finally, her voice turning sharp. "After everything I sacrificed for you, I didn't answer right away." Jason was beside me watching quietly. "Let me think about it," I said, and hung up. That evening, Jason cooked dinner, simple pasta with olive oil and garlic, and said, "I know it's not my place, but don't do it. If she wants a boutique, there are banks for that." His tone wasn't angry, just steady, the kind of steadiness that lets truth land softly. I called my mother the next day and said no. Politely, firmly. "I can help her look for small business resources, but I can't fund it." Eleanor's voice went cold. "So your fancy boyfriend's controlling your money now?" "You've forgotten where you came from." "This isn't about Jason," I said. "It's about boundaries." She hung up, and for 3 weeks there was silence. Then, as always, she called again, pretending nothing had happened. I knew that dance too well. Through all of this, Jason never said "I told you so." He showed me by example what healthy family looked like. His parents sent cards for no reason, called just to ask about my week, never asked for anything in return. I remember one Sunday dinner at their house, roast chicken laughter, quiet respect at the table. It was such a simple thing, but it undid me. Later that night, while we washed dishes side by side, I said I didn't know families could be like this. Jason dried his hands, then wrapped his arms around me. "Now you do," he said. That winter, I started writing my own rules. I set a strict budget for the money I sent home, enough for Eleanor's rent, nothing more. I asked for receipts and kept copies. Each time she protested, I stayed calm. It was strange hearing my own voice sound certain. "You've changed," she said one night. "You think you're better than us." "I just think differently now," I answered. "I told Dr. West about it in therapy the next week." She nodded. "Boundaries are not walls," she said. "They're doors with locks. You decide who gets a key." That image stayed with me, the quiet authority of a locked door. By the time Jason and I moved in together, I had begun to feel something like balance. The apartment was small, but filled with light the kind that turns floors golden at noon. On weekends, we'd walk to the farmer's market, carry home tulips or fresh bread, and pretend we had all the time in the world. I still sent the rent money, but the guilt had faded. I was learning that love to last must live on level ground. Then, one gray afternoon, a text arrived from Vanessa. It was short Mom's birthday dinner. Be there. Bring Jason. It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. Still, I agreed. Some part of me wanted closure, or at least the illusion of peace. I spent the next week restless, running through old memories like rehearsals. Jason noticed. You don't have to go, he said, squeezing my hand. Not if it costs you your calm. I looked at him and smiled, small but sure. I think I need to, I said. The night before the flight, I packed carefully. A simple dress, no jewelry, and an envelope tucked inside my bag, a printed record of every payment I had made over the years. I wasn't sure why I brought it. Maybe I just needed proof in case truth alone wasn't enough. As I zipped the suitcase, Jason watched from the doorway. Whatever happens, he said softly, you don't owe them an explanation for growing. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. Outside, the city hummed in its usual rhythm. Distant sirens, a car horn rang on the window. It was the sound of everything I had built. I didn't know then that the dinner ahead would change the course of my life. I only knew that something was coming, an ending, a beginning, or both. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to face it. The plane touched down just after dusk, the light outside turning the clouds to rose-colored glass. Jason squeezed my hand as the wheels met the runway. Neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavy but necessary. I had replayed the coming dinner in my mind so many times that the real thing already felt like a memory I hadn't yet lived. At the hotel, I stood at the window watching the city lights blink awake. Jason laid his suitcase on the stand and looked at me the way someone looks at a storm, steady, unafraid, waiting to move when the air shifts. You don't have to go, he said. I nodded, though both of us knew I would. There were things that couldn't stay unspoken anymore. The next afternoon, I ironed my dress in the soft hum of hotel air. Jason adjusted his tie in the mirror behind me. You sure you're ready for this? He asked. I didn't answer right away. I'm ready to stop pretending, I said, finally folding the hem of the dress with careful hands. When we reached my mother's house, twilight had settled like dust. The porch light burned bright, almost theatrical. Vanessa opened the door before we knocked. She was wearing a designer dress I'd seen in a magazine, the tag price flickering in my mind like a number on a screen. You like it, she said, twirling once. Just a little birthday gift to myself. The air smelled of new paint and something floral that didn't belong. Inside, I noticed a new flat-screen TV framed art I'd never seen and a sleek coffee table that didn't match anything else in the room. Jason gave me a quiet glance, the kind that didn't need words. My chest tightened with the realization that every check I'd written had helped pay for this illusion. A new outfit here, a weekend trip there. Not survival display. Eleanor emerged from her room dressed in something equally new, her earrings catching the light like small knives. You're late, she said, but smiled just enough to pass for civility. She kissed the air near my cheek, her perfume sharp and sweet. We should get going. The reservation's at 7. The restaurant was the kind of place she always loved, dim lighting, heavy silverware prices that dared you not to flinch. As we entered, a waiter guided us toward a long table crowded with familiar faces. Eleanor's friends, a few distant relatives, the kind of people who thrive on other people's business. Jason rested his hand lightly at my back as we found our seats. I could feel my heart beat through his fingertips. Dinner began with polite conversation, the hum of cutlery, and the occasional forced laugh. Eleanor commanded the center of the table, her tone bright and rehearsed. Vanessa leaned in, soaking up attention with practiced ease. When someone asked about my work, I answered quietly, describing my new position as department manager. The compliment that followed was brief perfunctory and quickly rerouted toward Vanessa's boutique plans. My mother beamed. "She's always had an eye for beauty," she said. "Creative people need encouragement." I watched Vanessa talk, hands gesturing, voice smooth, a picture of poise, and felt something like detachment settle over me. Not anger anymore, just clarity. It was as if I were watching a play I'd once auditioned for but no longer wanted a part in. The waiter poured champagne and Eleanor rose to speak. Her glass caught the candlelight. 60 years, she began, voice soft and full of self-importance. A time to celebrate family. She paused, her gaze moving across the table until it landed on Vanessa. "I'm so grateful for my daughter who stayed by my side through everything, loyal, caring, and full of promise." A small ripple of polite applause followed. I didn't move. The omission of my name was so deliberate it silenced even the clinking glasses. Eleanor smiled, satisfied, as if she had arranged the scene exactly as it should be. Jason's hand found mine under the table, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. I stared into my glass and waited for the heat in my face to fade. Dessert came, and conversation drifted back to small talk. But beneath it, something was unraveling in me, years of quiet tolerance losing their footing. When Uncle Robert, half drunk and too curious, asked about my relationship, I answered calmly. "We're happy," I said. "That's all that matters." Eleanor gave a dismissive laugh. "Nora's always been a bit of a commitment phobe," she said, cutting into her cake. "Too busy chasing career goals to think about what really matters." Her tone was light, but the words landed with precision. I looked up slowly, meeting her eyes across the table. "I think respect matters," I said. My voice was steady, even kind. But the quiet that followed had weight. She leaned back, smile tightening. "Boundaries," she said mockingly, as if the word itself were a foreign language. Such a modern excuse. In my day, family didn't keep score. "It's not about scorekeeping," I said softly. "It's about honesty." Something in her expression shifted, a flicker of recognition, then denial. "You're talking about money," she said, her voice sharpening. "Go on, tell everyone how generous you've been." The chatter around the table stilled. I felt Jason's grip tighten, but I didn't look at him. "You've brought it up." I said my words slow and measured. "Maybe we should." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "For years, Nora has been sending money home," she said, turning to her audience. "But it comes with strings, questions, conditions, judgments. As if her success gives her the right to control us." Vanessa nodded eagerly, her earrings swinging. "It's true," she said. "She acts like she's better than us." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I took a breath, letting silence fill the space before I spoke. "If I'm such a disappointment," I said quietly, "then who's been paying your bills?" The words landed like a bell in the room's stillness. Vanessa froze her champagne glass halfway to her lips. Eleanor's face lost its color. I felt none of the satisfaction I thought I might, only a calm I couldn't quite explain. For 5 years, I continued, my voice steady. I've sent more than $120,000. Rent, utilities, emergencies, tuition, car repairs, business dreams. I did it because I wanted to help, because I thought it would make us closer. I turned to the others at the table. Did any of you know that while my mother called me selfish, I was the one keeping her from eviction notices? A murmur rippled through the guests. Eleanor tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. "You're humiliating me," she said finally. "I'm telling the truth," I said. Because I'm done carrying the cost of your comfort. From tonight on, the money stops. The only thing I'll offer is honesty." Eleanor stood abruptly, trembling with fury. "After everything I've done for you?" she snapped. "This is how you repay me." I looked at her, really looked, and saw not power, but fear, the fear of losing control. "What exactly have you done for me, Mom?" I asked softly. "Other than remind me how much I owe." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. No answer came. I set my napkin on the table, the fabric trembling slightly in my hand. "Jason, let's go." He rose without hesitation, placing his arm around me as we stepped away. Behind us, Vanessa's voice rose desperate now. "You can't just walk away. Who's going to pay the rent? Who's going to fund my business?" I turned once at the doorway. "Maybe it's time you figured that out," I said. My voice didn't shake. "There's a word for that. It's called working." The restaurant's door closed behind us with a hush that felt like the end of a storm. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. I took a long breath, my chest expanding for the first time in years. The lights along the street blurred through unshed tears, but I wasn't crying for them anymore. Back at the hotel, I stood in front of the mirror, still in my dress makeup smudged at the corners of my eyes. Jason sat on the edge of the bed, watching quietly. "You did what you had to," he said. I nodded, though the words lodged somewhere deep. It shouldn't have to hurt this much to tell the truth. He rose and wrapped his arms around me, resting his chin on my shoulder. "You're grieving," he said softly. "Not them, the idea of them." That night, I barely slept. The room was filled with the hum of the city and the quiet aftershock of what I'd done. I checked my phone once out of habit, but there were no messages. Not yet. By morning, the silence had broken. Dozens of texts filled the screen, angry, pleading, manipulative in turns. "You've ruined everything," one read. "We were counting on you." Another said, "Typical Nora, always making herself the victim." I blocked the numbers. My hands shook, but the relief that followed was almost physical. We flew home that afternoon. The clouds outside the plane window stretched endless and white, a soft distance between what was and what could be. Jason held my hand as I closed my eyes. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the quiet waiting for me on the other side. I didn't know yet what healing would look like. I only knew I had finally drawn a line no one could cross again. And somewhere in the silence that followed, peace began to take its first fragile breath. Morning came slow the day after the flight home. The city outside my window hummed softly, the way it does when the sun hasn't quite broken through. Jason was still asleep, his hand resting lightly against mine. For a long moment, I just watched the pale light move across the curtains, touching the quiet corners of our apartment. The storm had passed, and all that was left was the stillness that follows truth. I made coffee and stood by the window while it brewed, listening to the faint rhythm of the drip and the muffled traffic below. It had been 3 days since the dinner. 3 days since I had said what needed saying and walked away. The silence that followed had been heavy at first, then strangely kind. No more pleading messages, no more sharp accusations, just quiet, clean, and vast, like a blank page. For the first time in years, my body didn't brace for the next demand. I realized how long I'd lived in that tension, waiting for guilt to ring through the phone. When it didn't, I could finally breathe fully again. Jason noticed it before I did. "You're standing taller," he said one morning, pressing a kiss to my temple. "Like you've been carrying something for years and finally set it down." In a way, he was right. But the weight wasn't gone entirely. It had just changed shape. Grief is like that. It doesn't disappear. It settles into you, becoming part of the landscape of who you are. I found myself missing Grandma Martha the most during those quiet mornings, her voice reminding me that courage is sometimes the gentlest thing a person can practice. Weeks turned into months, each one calmer than the last. Work filled my days. Long walks filled my evenings. I started keeping a small garden on the balcony herbs. Mostly, though, a few tulips struggled through the early spring chill. It felt grounding to watch something grow under my care that asked for nothing but light and water. Eleanor's silence stretched for nearly half a year. I heard bits and pieces through Aunt Patricia, polite, factual updates. Eleanor had taken a part-time job at a department store. Vanessa was working as a receptionist. They had moved into a smaller apartment near the edge of town. At first, I didn't know how to feel. Some days I felt pity, others relief. But mostly I felt distance, not cold, not cruel, just honest. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived in a handwriting I hadn't seen in years. My name on the envelope looked tentative, like it wasn't sure it belonged there. I opened it slowly. Nora, it began. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that we're managing. It hasn't been easy. Maybe it shouldn't have been. Vanessa's learning what work really means. So am I. I've thought a lot about what you said about respect. I can't promise we'll ever see things the same way, but I see now that you weren't trying to hurt me. You were trying to save yourself. I suppose that takes strength. I hope you're well. There was no signature, just the familiar tilt of her final line, the same way she used to sign my school forms. I folded it once, then again, and slipped it into the top drawer of my desk. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant either. It was something in between, a soft acceptance that peace doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it's just the absence of war. That night, I told Jason about the letter as we cooked dinner together. He stirred the sauce quietly, waiting. "Are you going to reply?" he asked after a moment. "I don't think I need to," I said. "Not yet." He nodded, understanding, without another word. That's what I loved most about him. The silence he offered without demand, the space that never needed filling. By summer, life had taken on a steady rhythm. Jason proposed one evening while we walked through Central Park, the sky streaked with pink and gold. There was no grand speech, no audience. Just him, holding out a simple ring, the sound of leaves rustling above us. "Let's keep building the life you fought for," he said. I said yes through tears I didn't expect. Not because I was surprised, but because it felt like something Grandma Martha would have wanted, not a fairy tale, but a promise made in daylight. We planned quietly, no spectacle, just a small gathering of friends, and Jason's family. Sarah was my maid of honor, and Dr. West sent flowers the morning of the ceremony with a card that read, "May peace be the home you return to every day." I kept it tucked in my bouquet. Eleanor didn't attend. I hadn't expected her to. But 2 weeks later, another letter came, brief and restrained. "I heard you were married. I wish you happiness." This time, I placed the letter on the windowsill beneath a small framed photo of Grandma Martha. That felt right, one generation's love beside another's belated understanding. Over time, Vanessa began to reach out. Small messages at first, a simple happy birthday, then later pictures of her thrifted clothing line turned online shop. "I started small," she wrote, this time with my own money. Her words carried a new weight, one built from work rather than entitlement. I congratulated her, and she replied with a single heart emoji. It wasn't much, but it was enough. In the quiet that followed, I realized how deeply peace can change a person. I no longer flinched when my phone rang. I no longer rehearsed conversations before they happened. My boundaries had become part of my breathing, natural, steady, unshakable. Jason and I moved to a larger apartment the next year, one with an extra room that we turned into an office for me and a studio for him. On the first morning there, I brewed coffee and opened the balcony doors wide. The air smelled of rain and lilacs from the courtyard below. I thought of all the mornings that had come before, the fear, the exhaustion, the longing, and realized how far I'd traveled without leaving myself behind. Aunt Patricia visited once that fall. Over tea, she told me how Eleanor had started volunteering on weekends helping sort donations at a local shelter. "She's quieter these days," Patricia said. "Maybe humbled. Maybe grateful." I smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. "People change when they have to," I said. "It's the only kind of change that lasts." That evening, after Patricia left, I found myself standing on the balcony again. The city was bathed in the amber light of sunset. Jason joined me, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. The tulips had faded by then, but a few green shoots were already pushing through the soil. "You've built something beautiful here," he said. I looked out over the rooftops, the sky widening before us. "We both did," I whispered. Later, as the first stars began to appear, I opened Grandma Martha's old letter one last time. The paper had yellowed at the folds, but the ink was still strong. "You were brave enough to break the cycle," she'd written. "The life you're building is worth every sacrifice." I traced the words with my finger, feeling the truth of them settle in my chest. Peace, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or applause. It arrives like dawn, quiet, gradual, inevitable once you turn toward it. Years from now, if someone asks what freedom felt like, I'll remember that evening, light spilling across our floor, the scent of coffee and rain, Jason's hand in mine, and the silence that no longer frightened me. Some wounds don't fade because we forgive. They fade because we finally let go. If this story touched something in you, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever had to choose peace over approval, I hope this story reminds you that it's okay. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of quiet strength and second chances. Thank you for listening and for believing that healing in the end can be enough.